My sister thought I was oblivious to her stealing my inheritance for 5 years. She announced at our family dinner that I should be grateful she managed everything. I had already filed criminal charges that morning. She was arrested at the table. The fork was halfway to my mouth when my sister Natalie stood up at the head of our parents' dining table, tapped her wine glass with a knife, and smiled at me like I was a child who'd just learned to tie my shoes. "I know managing the estate has been complicated," she said, her voice dripping with that particular condescension she'd perfected over 36 years of being the older, smarter, more responsible sibling. "But I think we can all agree that Alex should be grateful I've handled everything so well these past 5 years. God knows what would have happened to Mom and Dad's legacy if we'd left it to him." Around the table, 8 relatives nodded along, some smiling, some raising their glasses in agreement. My Aunt Patricia actually said, "Hear, hear." I set my fork down carefully and checked my phone under the table. The text from Detective Raymond Cole, 18 years with the Financial Crimes Unit, read, "Units are 2 minutes out. Keep her talking." My hands were steady. That surprised me. I looked at Natalie, at her perfectly highlighted hair and her designer dress that cost more than my monthly rent, and I smiled back. "You're absolutely right," I said. "I am grateful." The relief on her face was almost enough to make me laugh. I'd been living in Portland working as a high school history teacher for 7 years when my parents died in a car accident on a rainy November morning in 2018. My father had been driving them back from their cabin in the mountains when a drunk driver crossed the center line and hit them head on. They died instantly, together, which was the only mercy in the whole nightmare. I was 28 years old, drowning in student loans, and trying to build a career that paid barely enough to cover my 1-bedroom apartment and groceries. Natalie was 33, married to a corporate attorney named Jeffrey Whitmore, living in a house in the suburbs with marble countertops and a 4-car garage. She had an MBA from Yale and worked as a wealth management advisor for high-net-worth clients. When the estate attorney, Robert Cunningham, 41 years of practice, read the will 3 weeks after the funeral, he explained that our parents had left everything in equal shares to both of us: the house, the investment accounts, the life insurance policies, Dad's small accounting firm. Total value approximately $2.6 million after taxes and debts. $1.3 million each. Life-changing money for me. Comfortable padding for Natalie, who already had plenty. But there was a complication. The will specified that because I was under 30 and still establishing myself professionally, my portion would be held in a trust managed by Natalie until I turned 35 or demonstrated financial maturity and stability, whichever came first. At 35, the assets would transfer to me automatically. Natalie would receive her half immediately, and she'd serve as trustee for mine, managing the investments and approving any disbursements I might need for major expenses like buying a house, medical emergencies, or starting a business. She'd receive a standard trustee fee of 1% annually for her services. At the time, sitting in Robert Cunningham's wood-paneled office overlooking downtown Seattle, still numb from grief and exhaustion, I'd trusted my sister completely. She was the responsible one, the one who'd helped Mom and Dad set up their retirement accounts, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and organized family gatherings. "I'll take good care of it," she'd said, squeezing my hand across the conference table. "When you're ready to buy a house or whatever, just let me know. We'll make it work." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister. She'd held my hand at our parents' funeral. She'd cried with me in the cemetery when they lowered the caskets into the ground. I had no reason to suspect that she'd just been handed the keys to everything our parents had worked for, and she had absolutely no intention of ever giving me my share. For the first 18 months, everything seemed fine. I'd email Natalie occasionally asking about the trust balance, and she'd send back professional-looking statements showing the investments were growing steadily. "You're at $1,365,000 as of last quarter," she'd write in crisp, business-like emails. "Market's been good to us. The diversified portfolio I set up is performing exactly as projected." She'd attach PDF statements with logos from investment firms I'd never heard of: Whitmore Capital Management, Cascadia Investment Group, Pacific Northwest Trust Holdings. I assumed they were legitimate boutique firms she had connections with through her work. The letterhead looked professional, the numbers seemed reasonable, and I was too busy grading papers and planning lessons to scrutinize the details. When I asked if I could access some funds to pay off my student loans, which were crushing me at 6.8% interest and eating up nearly $600 of my monthly take-home pay, she'd explain in patient, almost condescending tones that the trust documents required the principal to remain invested for optimal growth. "You can't just pull money out whenever you feel like it, Alex. That's the whole point of the trust, to protect you from making impulsive financial decisions. Dad and Mom wanted this money to actually mean something for your future." She'd offer to approve small disbursements for genuine emergencies, but strongly encouraged me to handle the loans myself. "They're tax-deductible anyway. You're actually better off keeping them and letting the investments compound." I told myself she was probably right. She was the financial expert with the fancy degree after all. What did I know about investment strategy? When I mentioned wanting to put a down payment on a small house in Portland's rapidly inflating housing market in early 2020, thinking it was time to stop throwing money away on rent, she'd discouraged me immediately. "Prices are insane right now. You'd be buying at the absolute peak of the market. Give it another year and wait for the correction." Another year passed. Prices kept rising. I kept renting, watching my friends buy homes while I stayed stuck in my aging apartment complex with thin walls and a parking lot that flooded every time it rained. The first real warning sign came in year 3, March 2021, but I rationalized it away like an idiot. I was visiting Natalie and Jeffrey for Easter weekend, staying in their guest room that was bigger than my entire apartment, when I noticed Jeffrey's new car in their massive garage, a sleek, silver Porsche Cayenne, parked next to Natalie's Range Rover and their Tesla. "Nice ride," I said to Jeffrey over coffee the next morning, genuinely impressed. He was a partner at a corporate law firm, so expensive cars weren't exactly shocking, but this seemed excessive even for them. He smiled, but there was something uncomfortable in his expression, a brief flash of guilt that disappeared before I could analyze it. "Yeah, Nat surprised me with it for my birthday. Said business was going really well this year." I didn't think much of it at the time. Natalie made excellent money managing wealthy clients' portfolios, but later that same weekend, I overheard part of a conversation that should have set off alarm bells. I was coming back from the bathroom late Saturday night when I heard Natalie and Jeffrey talking in their home office. The door was cracked open, and Natalie's voice carried clearly. "I told you, the account reconciliation won't be an issue. He never asks to see the actual brokerage statements, just the summaries I send him. As long as I keep the PDF formatting consistent, he won't know the difference." Jeffrey's response was too quiet to hear, but Natalie laughed. "Jeffrey, relax. My brother thinks compound interest is what happens when you're really focused. He's not going to suddenly develop financial literacy. By the time he's 35 and the trust is supposed to transfer, we'll have figured something out. Maybe claim there were unexpected losses, or that the trustee fees were higher than anticipated. He won't challenge me. He never does." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart starting to pound. The rational part of my brain tried to find an innocent explanation. Maybe she was talking about a different client. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was just Natalie being dismissive in a way that hurt, but didn't actually mean anything sinister. I went back to the guest room and told myself I was being paranoid. She was my sister. She wouldn't steal from me. But that conversation planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't go away, growing quietly in the back of my mind over the following months. The second warning sign came 8 months later, in November 2021, when I asked Natalie if I could access $30,000 from the trust to finally pay off the highest interest portion of my student loans. I'd done the math, and the interest I was paying on those loans was killing me financially. Even if the investments were earning more than the loan interest rate, the psychological burden of the debt was affecting my sleep and my stress levels. I sent her a detailed email explaining my reasoning, showing her the calculations, asking politely for access to what was legally my money. Her response came 3 days later, and it was ice cold. "Alex, I've reviewed your request and I'm denying it. The trust documents are very clear that disbursements are only approved for major life purchases or genuine emergencies. Paying off student loans because you're stressed doesn't meet that threshold. You need to learn financial discipline and stop looking for shortcuts. This is exactly why Mom and Dad set up the trust this way. They knew you'd want to spend the money instead of letting it grow. I'm protecting you from yourself." I stared at that email for 20 minutes, reading it over and over. The condescension dripped from every sentence. The implication that I was financially irresponsible, that I needed to be protected from my own decisions, that she knew better than me about my own needs. But what really bothered me was the absolute certainty in her tone. Not, "Let's discuss this," or "I have concerns." Just a flat denial. No negotiation, no compromise. My money, held hostage by my sister's judgment of my worthiness. I called Robert Cunningham's office the next day, asking to review the original trust documents. His paralegal, a woman named Linda Cho, who'd been with his firm for 16 years, was apologetic, but firm. "Mr. Cunningham retired last year and sold his practice to Baxter & Associates. They have all his old files, but you'd need to request them formally. There might be a records retrieval fee." I called Baxter & Associates and was told the fee was $250 for copying and processing the file. I didn't have $250 to spare that month, not with my car needing new tires and my rent about to increase. I told myself I'd request the documents later, when I had the money. Meanwhile, I started doing something I should have done years earlier. I started documenting everything. Every email Natalie sent me, every statement she provided, every conversation we had about the trust. I created a folder on my personal laptop labeled Estate Documents and began building a timeline. December 2021, I asked Natalie for a full accounting of the trust's performance since inception. What investments had been made, what fees had been charged, what the current holdings were. She sent me a 2-page summary that looked professional but was frustratingly vague. Diversified equity portfolio, $892,000. Fixed income securities, $318,000. Alternative investments, $156,000. Total, $1,366,000. Alternative investments. What did that even mean? When I asked for more detail, she responded with irritation. "Alex, I send you quarterly statements. If you want to micromanage every single transaction, maybe you should have gotten a finance degree instead of becoming a teacher. I'm managing your money for free, essentially, since the 1% trustee fee barely covers my time. A little gratitude would be nice." That stung, and it was designed to. Natalie had always been good at making me feel guilty for questioning her, for not being sufficiently appreciative of her superior knowledge and competence. But something about that response felt wrong. She was getting 1% annually on over $1.3 million. That was $13,000 a year for basically sending me quarterly emails. That wasn't free. That was a significant consulting fee for minimal work, assuming she was actually managing the investments properly. I started wondering if she was actually managing anything at all. The third escalation came in March 2022, when I drove down to Seattle for our cousin's wedding and stayed with Natalie and Jeffrey again. Their house had changed. New furniture throughout, expensive-looking pieces I recognized from the design magazines my ex-girlfriend used to read, a completely renovated kitchen with professional-grade appliances, a home theater system in the basement that looked like it cost more than I made in 6 months. When I commented on the renovations, Natalie waved it off casually. Jeffrey made partner last year. Big bonus. We decided to finally fix this place up the way we wanted. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the timeline. Jeffrey had made partner in 2019, 3 years earlier. Why renovate now? I got up at 2 a.m, unable to quiet my racing thoughts, and went downstairs for water. Natalie's home office door was open, her laptop still on, casting a blue glow into the hallway. I should have walked past it. I should have respected her privacy. Instead, I stepped inside. Her email was open on the screen. I didn't touch anything, just read what was visible. It was an email thread with someone named Douglas Vance at Whitmore Capital Management. The subject line was, Q4 Portfolio Adjustments, A. Whitmore Trust Account. My heart started pounding as I read the preview text visible on the screen. Doug, transfer another $85,000 from the trust to the operating account as discussed. Coded as management fees and administrative costs. Alex won't question it. I stood there in the dark office, my pulse roaring in my ears, staring at those words. Transfer another $85,000. Another. Meaning she'd done it before. Multiple times. My sister was stealing from me. Actually, systematically stealing the inheritance our parents had left me. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and took a photo of the screen. The flash was off, but the camera sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. I took 3 more photos of other emails visible in her inbox, then got out of that office as fast as I could without running. Back in the guest room, I looked at the photos. They were clear enough to read. Clear enough to show a pattern of transfers from accounts that were supposed to be mine to accounts that were clearly Natalie's. Clear enough to prove that my sister had been systematically looting my inheritance for years while sending me fake statements and lecturing me about financial responsibility. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I lay in their guest bed, in their house that my money had probably paid for, and stared at the ceiling. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Natalie directly. I wasn't going to give her a chance to gaslight me, to explain it away, to make me doubt what I'd seen. I was going to get a lawyer, and I was going to find out exactly how much she'd stolen. I drove back to Portland Sunday afternoon and spent the next week researching attorneys who specialized in trust litigation and estate fraud. I found a firm called Bergman and Associates, elder law and trust litigation specialists, with a senior partner named Elizabeth Bergman, who had 26 years of experience and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. Her consultation fee was $400. I used my credit card. On a Thursday afternoon in late March, I sat in Elizabeth Bergman's office on the 14th floor of a building downtown and showed her everything I had. The photos of Natalie's emails, the vague statements she'd been sending me, the timeline of my requests for access to funds, and her denials. Elizabeth was 53 years old, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a navy suit and reading glasses on a chain. She reviewed my documentation in silence for nearly 30 minutes, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. Mr. Whitmore, based on what you've shown me, your sister has almost certainly been embezzling from your trust. The emails you photographed are extremely damaging evidence of fraudulent transfers. However, we need to see the actual brokerage statements and bank records to determine the full extent of the theft. She leaned back in her leather chair. The good news is that as a beneficiary of the trust, you have the legal right to demand a full accounting. The bad news is that if your sister has been falsifying statements for years, she's not going to voluntarily hand over records that incriminate her. I felt my stomach drop. So what do I do? Elizabeth tapped her pen against her legal pad. We file a petition with the court demanding that the trustee, your sister, provide a complete and accurate accounting of all trust assets, transactions, and fees since inception. If she fails to comply, or if the accounting reveals discrepancies, we can petition to remove her as trustee and potentially file criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Criminal charges. Against my own sister. How long does that take? I asked, my voice barely steady. The petition process? Typically 60 to 90 days to get a hearing, then another 30 to 60 days for her to comply with the court order. So we're looking at 4 to 6 months minimum before we have a complete picture of what's been taken. 6 months. I'd already waited 5 years. What was 6 more months? But part of me knew that if I went down this road, there was no coming back. This would destroy whatever remained of my relationship with my sister. It would tear our family apart. Elizabeth must have seen the hesitation on my face because she leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Whitmore, I understand this is your sister. I understand this is painful. But you need to understand something. If she's stolen even half of what I suspect she has, we're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money your parents worked their entire lives to leave you. Money that was supposed to secure your future. And she took it, knowing exactly what she was doing, while making you feel guilty for even asking about it. She paused. That's not a mistake. That's not a misunderstanding. That's calculated theft from a family member who trusted her. The question you need to ask yourself is, do you want justice, or do you want to preserve a relationship with someone who's been systematically robbing you for years? I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I want my money back, I said quietly, and I want her to face consequences for what she's done. Elizabeth nodded. Then let's get started. My retainer for this type of case is $15,000. I know that's a substantial amount, but given the size of the estate involved, I'm confident we can recover significantly more than my fees. I can also work with you on a payment plan if needed. $15,000. I didn't have $15,000. I barely had $1,500 in my checking account. Elizabeth saw my face and made a quick note. Alternatively, I can take this on a contingency basis. I get paid a percentage of whatever we recover. 33% is standard. That means you don't pay anything up front, but I take a third of whatever we win. A third of my inheritance was better than none of it. Contingency, I said. Let's do contingency. We shook hands. Elizabeth started drafting the petition that same day. The legal process moved slowly, frustratingly slowly. Elizabeth filed the petition in early April 2022. Natalie was served with the court documents at her office on April 18th. She called me that evening, and I'd never heard her so angry. What the hell is this, Alex? You're suing me? After everything I've done for you? Her voice was shaking with rage. You have some nerve. I've been managing your money, growing your inheritance, protecting it from your impulsive decisions, and this is how you repay me? By accusing me of theft? I kept my voice steady, remembering Elizabeth's coaching. Don't engage emotionally. Don't give her ammunition. Natalie, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm exercising my legal right as a beneficiary to receive a full accounting of the trust. If everything is legitimate, you have nothing to worry about. She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. If everything is legitimate, you're calling me a thief, Alex. You're dragging me into court based on what exactly? Some paranoid fantasy? I almost told her about the emails I'd photographed, almost threw it in her face, but Elizabeth had been clear. Don't reveal your evidence until you have to. The petition just asks for documentation, I said calmly. Brokerage statements, bank records, a transaction history, standard stuff for any trust. If you've been managing everything properly, it should be easy to provide. There was a long silence. Then Natalie's voice went cold in a way I'd never heard before. You're going to regret this. You're destroying our family over money. Mom and Dad would be ashamed of you. She hung up. I sat there holding the phone, my heart pounding, feeling sick. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was destroying the family. Maybe I should just let it go, accept whatever she'd been giving me, move on with my life. Then I looked at the photos on my phone again. Transfer another $85,000. No. She was the one who'd destroyed the family when she decided to steal from her own brother. The court hearing was scheduled for June 15th, 2022. 2 months of waiting. 2 months of Natalie refusing to speak to me. 2 months of family members calling to ask what was going on and why I was attacking my sister. I tried to explain without going into details, but it was clear most of them sided with Natalie. She was the successful one, the responsible one. I was just the struggling teacher who was probably jealous of her wealth. My Aunt Patricia called me in late May and spent 40 minutes lecturing me about family loyalty and forgiveness. Your sister has done nothing but help you, and this is how you treat her? You should be ashamed. I didn't have the energy to argue. The hearing itself was anticlimactic. Natalie's attorney, a shark named Preston Blackwell with 30 years of litigation experience, argued that my petition was harassment and that Natalie had been providing regular accounting statements all along. Elizabeth countered that the statements were insufficient and that I had the right to see actual brokerage documentation. The judge, the Honorable Monica Fairchild, 62 years old and known for no-nonsense rulings, ordered Natalie to provide complete records within 30 days. This is a straightforward request, Judge Fairchild said from the bench. The beneficiary is entitled to a full accounting. Provide the documentation or face contempt charges. Natalie's face went pale when the judge issued the order. Preston Blackwell tried to argue for more time, but Judge Fairchild shut him down. 30 days. That was it. We walked out of the courthouse, and Elizabeth pulled me aside. She's going to stall, and when she does provide documents, they're going to be falsified. Be ready for that. Elizabeth was right on both counts. Natalie filed for an extension, claiming the records were with multiple institutions and would take time to compile. Judge Fairchild granted 15 additional days, no more. When the documents finally arrived in mid-July, they were a mess. Dozens of statements from investment firms I'd never heard of, with transaction histories that made no sense. Transfers in, transfers out, fees that seemed excessive. But they were formatted professionally, and on the surface they seemed to show that the trust balance was approximately where Natalie had always said it was, around $1.4 million. Elizabeth spent 2 weeks analyzing the statements with a forensic accountant named Gregory Dunn, 31 years in financial fraud investigation. They found the discrepancies within days. The brokerage firm addresses didn't match actual registered companies. The account numbers had formatting inconsistencies. Several of the investment funds listed didn't exist. The statements were fake. All of them. Completely fabricated documents designed to look real enough to pass casual inspection. Your sister didn't just steal from you, Gregory told me in a meeting at Elizabeth's office. She created an entire fictional investment portfolio. These companies, these accounts, these transactions, none of it is real. The money that was supposed to be in trust for you is gone. She spent it. I felt the room tilt. All of it? Gregory nodded grimly. We're still tracing where it went, but so far we've found transfers totaling approximately $1,180,000 from the original trust account to personal accounts controlled by your sister and her husband over the past 4 years. The house renovations, the cars, the vacation property they bought in Maui last year, all funded with your inheritance. $1.18 million out of $1.3 million. She'd left just enough in the actual account to cover the trustee fees and make it look like there was something there, then stolen almost everything else. I couldn't breathe. Elizabeth put a hand on my shoulder. Alex, I know this is devastating, but this is also criminal. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. This is embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. We need to go to the police. That's how I ended up in a windowless conference room at the Seattle Police Department Financial Crimes Unit on a Thursday afternoon in late July, telling my story to Detective Raymond Cole. Raymond was 46 years old, 18 years on the force, with a shaved head and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every kind of human greed imaginable. He listened to my timeline, reviewed the documentation Gregory and Elizabeth had compiled, and asked pointed questions about Natalie's access to the accounts and her knowledge of estate law. This is a good case, he said finally. Clear paper trail, obvious motive, significant financial loss. But I need to warn you, prosecuting family members for financial crimes is complicated. Defense attorneys play the sympathy card hard. She made a mistake, she'll pay it back, don't destroy this woman's life over money. That kind of thing. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the past 5 years, about being made to feel stupid and irresponsible every time I asked about my own money, about Natalie living in luxury while I struggled to pay my student loans, about her sitting in her renovated house, driving her expensive cars, taking vacations to Maui, all funded by money stolen from her own brother. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Detective Cole nodded. Okay, give me 2 weeks to build the case with the prosecutor's office. We'll need to verify the forensic accountant's findings, subpoena bank records, establish the chain of custody for the evidence, then we'll bring charges. Those were the longest 2 weeks of my life. I went to work, taught my classes, graded papers, acted like everything was normal. Meanwhile, my entire world was imploding. Natalie had no idea what was coming. She thought she'd won by producing the fake statements. She thought I'd give up now that she'd proven everything was fine. She had no clue that detectives were currently tracing every dollar she'd stolen, building a criminal case that would destroy her life. On August 10th, Detective Cole called me. We're ready. The prosecutor's office is filing charges tomorrow. Embezzlement, wire fraud, forgery, and theft. That's a potential 25 years if convicted on all counts. But here's the thing. We want to arrest her publicly to prevent her from destroying evidence or fleeing. Do you know her schedule? I knew exactly where she'd be on August 11th at 6:30 p.m. Our Aunt Patricia's 70th birthday dinner at the same house where we'd gathered for holidays our entire lives. The whole family would be there, including me. The morning of August 11th, I sat in the prosecutor's office and officially filed criminal charges against my sister. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Torres, 12 years prosecuting white-collar crime, walked me through what would happen. The arrest will be at the dinner location. We want her surrounded by family, in a public setting, to minimize the risk of a scene. Detective Cole and 2 uniformed officers will execute the warrant. Your job is to keep her there and keep her calm until they arrive. Can you do that? Could I sit across from my sister, eating birthday cake and making small talk, knowing that police were on their way to arrest her, knowing that I was the one who'd set this in motion? I thought about my parents, about how hard they'd worked to build something to leave their children, about how Natalie had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. Yes, I said, I can do that. I showed up to Aunt Patricia's house at 6:15 p.m. Natalie was already there, holding a glass of wine, laughing with our cousins. She saw me, and her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. We hadn't spoken since the court hearing in June. I walked up to her, forced a smile, and said, "Hey, can we talk after dinner? I think we should try to work this out." The relief on her face was obvious. She thought I was surrendering. "Of course," she said warmly. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Family is more important than money, right?" Right. Family is more important than money. That's why she'd stolen mine. We sat down for dinner at 6:30. The table was crowded. Aunt Patricia, Uncle James, 3 cousins with their spouses, Natalie and Jeffrey, me. Everyone was in a good mood, celebrating, drinking wine, telling stories. At 6:45, Natalie stood up and tapped her wine glass for attention. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. She launched into her speech about managing the estate, about how grateful I should be, about protecting our parents' legacy. I checked my phone under the table. Units are 2 minutes out. I smiled at her, encouraged her, let her think she'd won. She kept talking, embellishing now, talking about the complexity of estate management and investment strategy and how hard she'd worked to grow my inheritance. Around the table, people were nodding along, looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to express my gratitude. Then I heard it. The sound of car doors closing outside, footsteps on the front walk. I set my phone on the table, face up, so I could see Detective Cole's final message. We're at the door. Natalie was still talking. So yes, I think a little appreciation is in order. I've spent 5 years managing Alex's money for essentially nothing in return, and I've done a damn good job of it. The trust has grown significantly under my management. The doorbell rang. Aunt Patricia stood up, confused. Who could that be? Everyone's here. She walked to the front door. I heard it open. Heard her gasp. Can I help you? A deep voice, calm and professional. Seattle Police Department. We have a warrant for the arrest of Natalie Whitmore. Is she here? The dining room went silent. Everyone turned toward the front hall. Natalie's face went from confused to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. What? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Cole walked into the dining room, 2 uniformed officers behind him. He was wearing a suit and tie, his badge clipped to his belt. His eyes found Natalie immediately. Natalie Whitmore, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, forgery, and grand theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Natalie stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. This is insane. There's been some mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. She looked at me, and I saw the exact moment she understood. Alex, what did you do? I met her eyes. I filed criminal charges this morning for stealing my inheritance. All of it. Her face went white. Jeffrey stood up, his lawyer instincts kicking in immediately. Don't say anything, Natalie. Not a word. I'll call Preston. But Natalie wasn't listening. She was staring at me with an expression of absolute betrayal and rage. You set me up. You planned this. You wanted to humiliate me in front of the whole family. I kept my voice level. I wanted you arrested. The location was just practical. Detective Cole stepped forward with handcuffs. Ma'am, please turn around and put your hands behind your back. Natalie looked around the room wildly, seeking allies, seeking someone to defend her. But everyone was frozen, shocked, not understanding what was happening. Aunt Patricia found her voice. Alex, what is this about? I pulled out my phone and opened the folder with Gregory Dunn's forensic analysis. Natalie has been embezzling from my trust for 5 years. She's stolen approximately $1.18 million of the inheritance Mom and Dad left me. The investment statements she's been sending me are completely fake. The money is gone. She spent it on her house, her cars, her lifestyle. I handed my phone to Aunt Patricia, showing her the documented transfers. The bank records, the fake statements side by side with real ones. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Aunt Patricia read it, her hand going to her mouth. She looked at Natalie. Is this true? Natalie's eyes were wild. He's lying. He hired some shady accountant to fabricate evidence because he's jealous. I've done nothing but help him, and he's destroying me out of spite. Detective Cole had heard enough. Ma'am, turn around, now. The steel in his voice made it clear this wasn't optional. Natalie turned around slowly, tears streaming down her face, and let herself be handcuffed. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was the loudest thing in the room. Jeffrey was already on his phone, calling Preston Blackwell. The other dinner guests sat in stunned silence, not knowing where to look or what to say. Detective Cole led Natalie toward the front door. As she passed me, she hissed, I'll never forgive you for this. Never. I watched her go. Watched the police walk my sister out of our aunt's house in handcuffs, put her in the back of a patrol car, and drive away. Then I turned to the table full of family members who were all staring at me with varying expressions of shock, confusion, and anger. I pulled out my laptop from my bag. I'd brought it knowing this moment would come. I opened it and projected Gregory Dunn's full forensic report onto the television in the dining room. I know this is difficult to process. I know it looks like I just destroyed Natalie's life for no reason. So I'm going to show you exactly what she did, with documentation, and you can all make your own judgments. For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through it. The original trust amount, the fake investment firms, the fabricated statements, the actual bank transfers showing money going from the trust account to Natalie's personal accounts, the timeline of her purchases, the house renovations in 2020, funded by a $180,000 transfer from my trust, the Porsche in 2021, funded by $95,000 from my trust, the Maui vacation property in 2022, funded by $220,000 from my trust. Every major luxury purchase they'd made in the last 5 years, funded by money she'd stolen from her brother while telling him he wasn't responsible enough to access his own inheritance. When I finished, the room was silent. Uncle James was the first to speak. Jesus Christ, Alex. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Aunt Patricia was crying. Your parents trusted her. How could she do this? One of my cousins, Daniel, a lawyer himself, asked the logical question. What happens now? I closed my laptop. She'll be arraigned tomorrow. The prosecutor thinks she'll try to plead out to reduce the charges, but that depends on whether she's willing to admit what she did and pay restitution. If she fights it, this goes to trial. The next few months were brutal. Natalie pleaded not guilty and fought the charges with everything she had. Preston Blackwell built a defense around the idea that there had been misunderstandings and miscommunications, that Natalie had made some accounting errors but had never intended to steal, that this was a family dispute being criminalized inappropriately. The prosecutor, Jennifer Torres, demolished that defense systematically. She put Gregory Dunn on the stand to explain the forensic analysis. She showed the jury the fake investment statements side by side with real ones. She presented bank records showing deliberate, repeated transfers from the trust to Natalie's personal accounts. She played voicemails Natalie had left me over the years, lecturing me about financial responsibility while she was actively stealing from me. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Judge Fairchild did not mince words. Ms. Whitmore, you betrayed your brother's trust in the most fundamental way possible. You stole money your parents left him, money meant to secure his future, and you spent it on yourself while making him feel guilty for even asking about it. This was calculated, systematic theft over a period of years. The court finds this to be among the most egregious breaches of fiduciary duty I have encountered. She sentenced Natalie to 8 years in state prison and ordered full restitution of $1,186,000 plus interest and legal fees. Natalie would have to liquidate everything, the house, the cars, the Maui property, her investment accounts, to pay me back. Even then, she'd likely still owe hundreds of thousands. Jeffrey divorced her before she even started serving her sentence. The betrayal wasn't just mine. He'd had no idea what she was doing either, and the revelation destroyed their marriage. He kept his job, barely, but his reputation was damaged by association. Natalie's career was over. No wealth management firm would ever hire her again. Most of the family cut contact with her. A few tried to maintain relationships, but it was awkward and strained. How do you have a normal conversation with someone who stole over $1 million from their own brother? I ended up recovering about $840,000 through the restitution order and asset liquidation. Not everything I was owed, but significantly more than I'd have gotten if I'd just accepted Natalie's fake statements and moved on. With that money, I paid off my student loans, bought a small house in Portland, and invested the rest conservatively. I also quit teaching and went back to school for an MBA, figuring I'd learned enough about financial fraud to want to understand it properly. Maybe prevent it for others. 3 years later, I ran into Jeffrey at a coffee shop in Seattle. We'd both been avoiding each other, the whole situation too painful and complicated. But we ended up talking for 2 hours. I should have known, he said. Looking back, there were signs. The expensive purchases, the vague explanations. I just trusted her. We both did. I didn't have anything to say to that. Trust is what family is supposed to be built on. Natalie had weaponized that trust against both of us. Have you talked to her? He asked. No. Have you? He shook his head. She writes letters sometimes, mostly blaming you, blaming me, blaming everyone but herself. I stopped reading them. I got one of those letters a year ago. 5 years after her arrest, 3 years into her sentence. It was 8 pages of handwritten rage and self-pity. How I'd destroyed her life over money. How she'd made some mistakes, but didn't deserve to lose everything. How our parents would be ashamed of me for sending my own sister to prison. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd actually done. Just anger that she'd been caught and punished. I read it once, then threw it away. Some people never take responsibility for their choices. They'll rewrite history in their heads until they're the victim, no matter what they've done. Natalie will get out of prison in a few years, and she'll probably spend the rest of her life believing I'm the one who wronged her, that I'm the one who destroyed our family, that she was just trying to help, and I ruined her life out of greed or jealousy or spite. She'll never understand that she destroyed our family the moment she made the decision to steal from me, that every fake statement she sent, every condescending lecture about financial responsibility, every dollar she transferred from my account to hers was a choice, a deliberate choice to betray the person who trusted her most. I think about my parents sometimes, about what they'd think if they knew. I like to believe they'd be proud of me for standing up for myself, for refusing to be victimized, for demanding accountability. But I'll never really know. What I do know is this. They left me an inheritance because they loved me and wanted to give me a foundation to build on. Natalie tried to take that away, and I made damn sure she failed. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.